here we go. Let's double check and make sure
that
we're
says you're streaming on my thing.
Before we start. Give me a second. Okay. It looks on my side that we're live.
All right.
Do you see? Okay. So we just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We have the wonderful Reverend Drew Ludwig is with us, who may be familiar to some of you, may be not familiar to others. He is currently serving as a chaplain. He's an activist here in Buffalo. And again, some of you guys might know him as the former pastor of Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church. He's a dear friend to Micah and I, has been so welcoming. And he's going to be talking to us tonight about what it means to be an ally in 2020 and some other things that are going on here in Buffalo, some groups that we can already join and support, and other things kind of like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Micah, do you want to go ahead and pray us in?
Absolutely. Welcome to the third week of this study, Race in the Gospel. And tonight, to talk about what does it mean to be a part of protest now. And we've made a lot of historical references in our previous conversations, but what does that mean for today, and particularly the church? I thought I would start with this quote from theologian James Cone, who has written a lot of stirring works challenging us to recognize Blackness in its beauty and wholeness, and decentering whiteness as institutions and as people. James Cone writes, "The truth of the gospel is always offensive and unpopular because it expresses solidarity with the powerless and those on the margins." So I think a lot of our conversation, just having this conversation has found its way to be offensive to certain people. I've had conversations where just having a conversation about race, they believe is racist. So they will avoid these kind of conversations, and their excuse is that these actions are racist, when in actuality, this is how we begin anti-racist work, is to at least begin discussing and then moving into action, which hopefully Pastor Drew can talk about what that looks like now for us in this particular community. So let us go to the Lord in prayer, and we will begin. Creator God, we admit that unknowingly we have been complicit in making an idol out of whiteness, being a part of systemic injustices, and many times turning a deaf ear to those who are crying out in pain and suffering, even in our own communities. Make us more empathetic, make us more attentive to the cries of the suffering, as the Old Testament prophets warned that great destruction would come to those that failed to heed your call to justice. And as Jesus lived a life pointing toward liberation, may we become more aware of ways that we get in the way of liberation, and how we can be part of being on the right side of history as we seek to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with you. And we ask all this in your awesome name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so we're going to hand it on over to Drew now. And Drew, the way that he has requested that we work tonight is that if you have a question, just raise your hand or say, hey, and he'll call on you, and then you can ask your question.
Yeah. Actually, you can do that, but another nice thing that you can do is if you see the chat function, if you're on a laptop on the bottom of your screen, if you throw the question in the chat, that'll make sure that I see it, but I might not respond to it right in the moment if I'm like in a flow, right? But I'll try to get to all of them. And even if there's questions are good. If there's something that you want me to talk about, but it's not quite a question, you can put that in the chat too, and we'll do our best to get to them. Here's what I want to do to get us started though. So the highly academic and difficult task of thumbs up with your right hand. So if you can, please show me your thumb up with your right hand. If you're on Facebook Live, I can't see you, but pretend I can. Then with your left hand, make a pointer finger and point at your thumb. So far, so good. This is the easy part, right? Now, here's the hard part. When I say go, you are going to switch I can't even say it. Switch which each hand is doing. So when I say go, your left hand is going to go thumbs up and your right hand is going to point at your finger like that. Okay? And then when I say go, we'll do it again. Now, some of you are like making the guns, or right? You want one thumb up, one point, right? And then you switch and you do the other thumb up and point. Okay, no finger guns, right? And then switch it back. Switch it. Okay, just work on it a little bit. Keep practicing. See if you can get to the point. It's hard, right? I see a couple people doing double points and finger guns and forwards and backward. Okay, you can stop. That was just an illustration of a really simple theory of learning. And it's 4 stages of learning. And I realize I've got some professors and academics in the room, so you can critique them and clarify them a little bit. But most of us start off in the first stage of learning, which is when we are unconsciously ignorant. That means we don't know how to do something, and we don't know that we don't know how to do something, right? So you probably didn't know that you were bad at this because no one ever asked you to do this. You were unconscious, you were ignorant, but you had no idea. And what I invited you to do was to try to do something that you had never done before, which made you uncomfortable because now you are conscious of your ignorance. That's the second stage of learning, right? So now you know that you don't know, which feels, ignorance is bliss. It feels so much better knowing that you don't know, not knowing that you don't know. Now you learn that you don't know, right? Stage 3 of learning is conscious competence. Maybe some of you are getting to that, where if you looked at your fingers and you thought about it, you were able to do it. And then stage 4 of learning is unconscious competence, where you've practiced, you've done your scales and your drills so many times that you can drive or talk or do another thing because the grooves in your brain are well worn, right? And now you feel confident and happy and proud because you're able to do something. Why am I talking about that now? Well, one of the wonderful things about being white and one of the horrible things about being white is you never ever have to think about your race, because in a culture that is created by white people and run by white people and organized for white people, right? Everything just, you don't have to think about who you are. You're like a fish in water. So when we start talking about race, right? Like Micah mentioned, some people are like, oh, you can't talk about that, right? Well, people don't like to talk about it because you move into an uncomfortable place. You become conscious, conscious of your incompetence. You realize, I never learned how to talk about this stuff. I never learned how to think about this stuff. Some of us even begin to feel guilty because we realize that maybe we've participated in some things that we didn't even know, but we were hurting other people. When we talk tonight, I want you to feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because that's part of learning and growing, right? If you're lifting weights and it's never hard, you're not getting stronger. But if it hurts a little bit, if it stretches you a little bit, that's a sign of growth, right? It's good for us to become aware of the things that we don't know so that we can keep moving together. But going into that second stage of learning, that is the hardest part, because that's the part where you feel dumb. And it's not your fault, right? Like, nobody taught this stuff, especially to white people. So it's good to feel dumb. It's good to feel the challenge, because that is when you're growing and learning. But it's hard to be that way. Because it's hard to be in that situation, if you say something that doesn't quite feel right, or like use a word, I'll give it a little example, because I didn't go over things with Micah and Caitlin today, right? She said, we're going to talk about how to be allies, right? That used to be like the goal for white people, to say like, yes, I'm going to be an ally for racial justice. And then someone pointed out, allies kind of, well, they're like fans, right? They're like, I'm on your side, right? Like I'm with you, but like I'm not in it, right? And so with a lot of people doing racial justice work, we say, we're going to try to help people moving from being allies to being accomplices, right? An ally is an individual doing their own thing. They can opt in, they can opt out. If you're an accomplice, you're in it with them. You're on the team, right? And you're taking leadership. You're part of that organized movement. Now, I could have, when Caitlin said, oh, we're going to talk about being a white ally in 2020, I could have said, get with it. You're wrong. Come on. No, I'm not going to work with you, right? And what good would that have done for the relationship with Caitlin? What good would it have done for me? What good would it have done for the movement, right? Because when I share, I'm going to talk about my work with Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. I'm going to share some of the core values in that. But showing up for racial justice, this is an organization that exists to get more and more white people involved and acting in an organized way in the fight for racial justice. And one of the exercises that we do, actually, maybe I'll do it with you guys. We talk about the spectrum of white people. I got to stay within the screen, right? So if you think about white people and race and racism, is this your left side? Okay, good. You can probably think about some of the folks on the extreme bad end, right? We've got the Bull Connors, we've got the Adolf Hitlers. You can come up with contemporary examples if you want. I don't want to start fights, but we could name racist white people. Some of us might be able to name some anti-racist white people. Does anyone want to celebrate some anti-racist white accomplices that you can think of today? Unmute yourself if you do it, and you can shout them out.
Well, Bob Kennedy.
Tell us a little bit more about him, Dr. Martin.
Okay. Oh, you want me to talk to him?
Just give us the 3-sentence bio.
Okay, I was very impressed when he went to the funeral of, was it Martin Luther King? He said, I don't know how this feels, and I'm paraphrasing terribly, but I lost a brother too. And he was able to do what I call a transcendent moment. It wasn't really what he said, although it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was.
Oh, you said Bob Kennedy. It blurred a little bit when you spoke up. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a favorite of mine is Clarence Jordan, who started an interracial Christian community in Southwest Georgia called Koinonia Farm. Habitat for Humanity was born out of that. They faced the wrath of the Klan and lived through it. So anyone else want to lift up a name while we're in here?
A favorite of mine is David Lamont, songwriter, author. He's very involved in local protest and national protest, and wrote a particularly moving children's book about facing the KK in an area in Tennessee, a true story. And the name of the book is White Flower. And it's a wonderful way to introduce children to social justice work. And he incorporates his theology in his songs so well. So look him up sometime, David Lamont.
And he's a Presbyterian too.
Oh, very nice. Always give a shout out to the Presbyterians. So we've got this spectrum of white people, right? We've got Bull Connor on one side. We've got Ann Braden, a great anti-racist educator and organizer on the other side. But guess what? The people at the extremes don't set the policies. What happens is the government and the banks and culture and everyone listens to all the people in the middle. And I don't really like white supremacists, but one of the things that white supremacists do well is they take people that are broken, people that are angry, people that aren't fitting into society, and they befriend them. And they train them and they coach them and they accept them with all of their messed upness, right? And that's how those movements grow. They just collect those folks. One of the problems with a lot of white anti-racists, and I've been this guy before, so I can't even judge, is you learn something and all of a sudden you're the expert. And you know what white people really like to do? Feel better than other folks, right? So if we find ourselves like moving towards the good anti-racist end of the spectrum, and somebody says the wrong thing or their analysis isn't quite perfect, right? A lot of times what we do is we do what makes us feel better right away. And what makes us feel better is being the not racist person that calls out the racist person. And what we do when we do that is we push them back into the middle or further and further to the worst end of the spectrum, right? Whereas if we are going to change this country, if we're going to change this world, what we need is more and more people with more and more power. So that's a good introduction. Caitlin, can you help put me on so that I can share screen again? I couldn't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, you should be able to now.
I can. So I'm putting up on the screen some of the values of the organization that helped me start doing anti-racist work in a helpful way. I had gotten mad about racism before I got to know the people from Surge, and really all I did was make other people angry and make myself frustrated and didn't accomplish a whole lot of change. But what Surge did for me is gave me some values and some framework and some people to work in a way that is hopefully more productive. And I believe that, in my short time working with Surge, the Buffalo chapter was organized in 2016. We've already begun to see change in Buffalo and in this world, not just through us, but I'm going to say that I find that our work is life-giving and good, even as there's a whole lot more to do. So what you see on the screen is the values that Surge organizes around. And I want to spend most of the time tonight just explaining what those values are, to invite you into that work and to ground you in those values. If you end up working with another organization, there's a whole lot of organizations that you can work with. But if you end up working with Surge, then you've got a leg up because you'll know how we organize and the tradition that we organize out of. So the first value that we have is calling people in, not out. That means that when somebody who is a potential ally, someone who a potential friend and a potential accomplice, right, doesn't have it all figured out or makes a mistake or whatever, instead of just calling them a name or making them feel bad so that we can feel better, we invite them in. Have you thought about this, right? Can you say that a different way? I would invite you to think about this, right? Can you hear the difference between calling in, which invites growth and change, instead of calling out? So we're direct, straightforward, but inviting people in to grow and inviting and taking the time to have a conversation to help them to understand that growth. What calling people in isn't, we don't call politicians in power in, right? Politicians and people in power of institutions or whatever, they change because they're made uncomfortable, right? So calling in is for our team that we're trying to grow. There's some folks that we're going to work really hard to make uncomfortable because that's part of what helps them change. We also don't expect or tell people of color to practice calling people in. They live with race and racism in a way that those of us that are seen as white don't have to live with it, right? So we see it as our work to reach out to and bring in white folks. We don't ask people of color to do that, right? That's another part. It's not even in the values, right? But we're working from the understanding that racism is a problem that was created by white people. And so white people have a responsibility to work to fix that problem, which means going out to other white people and organizing white people into the fight for racial justice. So we don't expect it from people of color. We don't do it with people of power. We also don't throw other minorities or other oppressed people under the bus as part of calling in. So like, we don't put up with folks being anti-queer or anti-disabled people or anti-working class people, right? Like we don't let that stay. We can still call people in and say, hey, we need to think about this differently. This is how we talk differently, right? But we don't tolerate continued oppression as we work against one time, right? Oppression anywhere is a threat. Oh man, sorry, I'm talking faster than I'm thinking.
Injustice in anywhere is a threat.
Yeah, I like it with oppression. Yeah, I like that you came up with a new quote.
Nope, don't. Let's not do new quotes tonight. At least not that one. So that's the first value. Quickly, questions, comments, remarks on the first value. You can raise your hand or you can pop a question into chat. Are you seeing something, Micah?
Just an immediate question I would throw at you, Drew, is some people will not join this kind of work. I mean, you're right at the beginning talking about the values, but they won't even get that far because they dismiss the current movement, which is so, Black Lives Matter is so much more than an organization. It's a movement going back to the horrific killing of a teenage boy, as you know, who was killed basically because he was Black and wore a hoodie in 2012. That's where the hashtag was born. But so many people will dismiss an entire movement based on a small fringe of people who have acted in violence, or sometimes just based off an article, one article about a particular group. What is a way to diffuse that and get people continue to be interested in this work?
That's a good question. So it really is, you have to feel people out. Jesus said, don't throw your pearls before swine. There's some people that just aren't interested, and talking to them will waste your time that might be more productive doing other things. I'm just going to put that out there. And I think that, for the organized forces of racism, that is actually a strategy that is employed. So I think it's okay to give people a simple and direct answer. And if they don't want to engage, Jesus said, it's okay to shake the dust off your feet and move on to the next town. So there's a time to do that. There's a time to say, it looks like we disagree. I wish you well. And if you do that with kindness and respect, that leaves the door open to have a conversation another time. And speaking as a person of faith and a minister, we ought to show grace and patience for the people that we used to be, right? Like that was me a few years ago, or a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, depending on what the issue was, right? And all of a sudden I have a conversion. I think I'm better than the person I used to be. Well, I had the conversion, so I'm glad I'm where I am. But boy, I really ought to have grace and sympathy for the person that I was a few minutes ago.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I think that this point is so important, because I think so often when I get frustrated with somebody, I think, okay, thank God somebody was patient with me, and can I be that person for this person? Sometimes I can't be that person for this person. I just can't. So I have to leave that to God and leave it to the idea that somebody will come along and be able to be that person for this person. Yeah. But I try, to be that person, because there's a lot of somebodies who are graceful to me as I, because you don't grow up, or you don't, like you said, you don't grow up learning this. In fact, you grow up learning the opposite. And so somebody had to come along and educate me. And so can you be that person to just one step, get them
Exactly. And sometimes just letting people sit in discomfort for a little time gives them the chance to work it out, right? I'm going to move on to the next value just because I don't want to talk all night, and I can. We believe in accountability through collective action. Lot of big words in that one value, right? But we hold ourselves accountable not to our intentions, right? A lot of what white people do is we say, well, I meant well, right? Well, great, right? We hold ourselves accountable to what we do. Action, right? Book studies are great. That's part of education and growing and learning. But book studies maybe change your heart, They don't change the world, they don't change culture, right? So we believe in action. And what kind of action? Collective action. As white people and as Americans, we tend to be very individualistic. You can feel good about yourself making a bombastic social media post or, you know, doing a heroic action by yourself. Big change happens when people work together. So we believe in collective action. Surge, the organization that I work with, believes our collective action is accountable to people of color. That means that we take our direction from Black people and other people of color. We don't decide what racism is or how to fix it. We listen to the people that are most affected by it, and we employ their strategies that they ask us to do, even when they make us feel uncomfortable. Because you know what? It's not our butts that are on the line, right? It's not our lives that are at risk. So Surge, both locally and nationally, is accountable to organizations of people of color. Locally, Surge Buffalo is accountable to a group called Black Love Resists in the Rust, right? That is an all people of color group that is working for racial justice. They work often in close conjunction with Showing Up for Racial Justice Buffalo. Nationally, Showing Up for Racial Justice is accountable to the Movement for Black Lives. That doesn't mean that when something happens, we sit on our thumbs and we wait for directions, right? That's not cool either, to make people do all the work of organizing us and pointing us out and things like that. It means that we are constantly listening, checking in, right? We can act, but we understand that we are not in charge. We have the freedom to move and to act. We are accountable. And when we get called out, when we get corrected, we listen, we learn, which brings us to our next value. We believe that we ought to take risks, make mistakes, learn, and keep going. By the way, you can see this stuff if you Google Showing Up for Racial Justice and values, you'll be able to see the values and go through them on your own later. Remember this? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw up. We all are, right? And people of color take risks every day just by going outside, right? So we're going to take risks when we act. We're not only going to do things that feel safe and secure for us, as we do that, we're going to make mistakes, right? There's a lot of people, especially white people, that get frozen into inaction by expecting and demanding perfection. Well, I need to learn this, I need to prepare for this, I need to get all my ducks in a row, right? And guess what? If you wait for the right moment, if you wait for everything to be perfect, it will never, ever come. So we take risks, we make mistakes, we learn from those mistakes, and we keep going. And we understand that the other people in the group with us are also taking risks, making mistakes, and we help them learn and keep going. So we do that together. I didn't do questions after the other two. I'm going to depend on you. Speak up, wave your hands, whatever, if you have a question. The floor is always open. But I like to talk and I want to be done by 7:15. We organize our third value. Is this our third value? Fourth value, out of mutual interest. White people love to be helpers, right? It feels so good to help. Because when you help, you maintain your superior position, right? I'm still who I am, and I'm gonna give you a hand, right? Sometimes, especially minister types like me, we organize out of moral interest. Do this because it's the right thing to do. Well, you know what? You can like morally hector people into action for a little bit, but not long and sustained action. If we want long and sustained action, we have to discover our own interest in this work. Why do we need to dismantle and take apart white supremacy? Why do we need to challenge these structures? Because even though they hurt people of color disproportionately more, guess what? They hurt us too. Black people are disproportionately victims of police violence, but white people are too. Disabled people are too. And you know what? You live in America in 2020. There's probably a person of color that you love, that you want to be free, to live in a just society that works for them, right? So you have your own mutual interest. I'm not going to try to get you to do this because it's the right thing generally. I want you to join the fight against racism, to join against the fight against white supremacy, because it makes a difference for you. So we organize out of mutual interest.
Hey, Drew, I have a question.
Go ahead. You interrupted just like I told you to.
Yes, I'm not afraid to interrupt. Nobody else should either. So if you have a question, don't be afraid. So a big part of that last thing is a a big buzzword, intersectionality, right?
Yeah, fun word.
So how like our as a woman, my oppression or the ways that I'm oppressed is similar, or similar strategies are used to oppress other groups, whatever they are. Well, that's like kind of a new thing, right? Like you think back to the 60s and Raynard Buston, who was an LGBT person who was active in Martin Luther King's campaign, but was told like that he had to help out with sandwiches because he was because he was LGBT, and he was told,
right,
y'all need to wait. And then women Black women were told, y'all need to wait. You guys can sing, but like y'all's issues, we need to get we need to get Black people voting, and then we can deal with y'all's issues later. And so intersectionality is kind of like a new, thing. And so I have a question. I guess my question is, there's some people who might be hesitant to join certain groups because they're not for queer people, or they're not for, women, or, whatever, but they are for this. And so I don't know. I'd like to hear you think about that and what your thoughts are about that.
Absolutely. And so like I became an accomplice for racial justice before I became an accomplice for queer people. And I guess what I would say is that if you can strategically keep your mouth shut, right? Like you can jump in, and that can be your growing edge and your learning edge, right? But what we can't do is pit groups against each other, right? And that doesn't work, because we're trying to build a movement. We're going to skip ahead. One of the next value after this one is growing is good. Like if we're going to win, and that's the goal, to win, we need numbers, right? And frankly, like divide and conquer is an ancient strategy that's been used for a long, long time. So we, in our meetings, right, in our work, we don't allow anti-queer sentiment to just hang in the air, right? We include folks of all different abilities, all different classes, but there are folks that still join in our work, right? And they know that like they just can't do whatever like oppressive or hurtful thing in that space, which frankly, you can't. That's how it's going to work at school. That's how it's going to work at your workplace, right? If you have private things, or if you're just still growing in some space, that's fine. And we're all still growing and learning in lots of different ways. But the mutual interest really is like, what do you need for you to be free and whole, right? Nobody's free until everybody's free. So like that's why I'm in this fight, like for my own well-being, so that I can sleep well at night. And I hope that other folks hear that call and respond to that call.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next value. There is enough for all. So a lot of, I'm talking to church groups, right? So in church groups, we talk about a theology of scarcity versus a theology of abundance, right? God has blessed this world abundantly. There is more than enough stuff for all of us. And a lot of times racism grows because we get the idea that if another group gets more justice or more stuff, then somehow we're going to lose, right? Guess what? freedom is not pie. There's enough for everybody. We can all have it. So we reject this idea that there's not enough stuff for everybody to be free and whole and well. And boy, time is flying, so I'll just keep going. Growing is good. I talked about that. We want to build a movement. We need to constantly grow. You know what that means practically? It means that we're not always going to have the best and most experienced person in charge of each thing at every action. Why? Because we need to keep growing new leaders. We need to get more people involved. Surge does things in a wonderfully inefficient way. And that is by design, because we want more and more people to get involved. So we'll see people making mistakes. And I've been in so many talks where I say, I am such a gifted public speaker. How come I'm not at the microphone instead of this other schlub that's like stuttering through things, right? Well, it's because we are trying to grow. We are trying to grow new leaders. We are trying to involve new people. And if Drew does everything all the time, then the movement will be as big as Drew, and that's not big enough. Growing is good. For as big as I am, that's not big enough. The last thing, the last of our values, and our values have changed. So when I started working with Surge, center class was not in our list of values. But center class means that we are going to, in our analysis of racism, always consider class as part of it. You know why? Because there is a very common assumption that racism is something that lower class people do. Right? Those people from Alabama, Micah. I'm teasing because I love you. But racism was created by and for the benefit of the upper classes and the wealthy, right? And we need people of all classes in this work. And it is offensive and incorrect to assume that lower class folks are automatically racist or whatever. And often folks and I said lower class, I'm gonna call myself in. I don't like to say lower class, right? Like working class. Often people in working classes, as opposed to owning classes or poorer classes, like those are the people that are most affected and most hurt by racism. They have the most to gain by joining in this anti-racist.
Yeah. I mean, I bought it coming from Alabama, and I did face, a lot of racism there. I kind of bought into that narrative that it's just these undereducated, certain level of living folks. And it was upon travel and moving from Alabama that when I was like, oh, okay, I'm away from racism. I'm among the, educated upper middle class Presbyterians. Surely there won't be any racism here. And I was greatly surprised.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you discovered that we're as horrible as some of the other folks. But yeah, we've made mistakes and we're learning, and we're gonna keep growing.
Do you think it's helpful to separate the concepts of racism and prejudice? Racism is a systematic organizational way of suppressing a class of people.
I do think it's helpful, and that's a great question. Like prejudice is about individual and personal feelings, right? And lots of us are prejudiced, right? And we need to deal with our prejudices. But guess what? If all of the white people in the whole United States dealt with their individual and personal prejudices, the systems and structures of racism, or to put it in Bible talk, right? The powers and principalities of this world would still be in place, right?
Yes,
so the structures and the systems, that's where racism lives, right? Yes. Prejudice lives in your heart, and we got to take care of that, right? But racism is organized and it's power, and so that's why I would make that distinction. I would also, people talk about reverse racism. That's not a thing. People of color, white people, everybody can and will be prejudiced sometimes, right? But racism is the system of power, right? And that system was built by white people, with white people on top and people of color on the bottom. There is no reverse version of that.
Right.
So yeah, that's racism and prejudice.
But part of what we're seeing, I think, is that with these civil rights laws in 65, which were incomplete, but that began breaking racism in the country, which was very formalized with Jim Crow and enslavement. But many of the people that we're talking about here, the rich and the poor, still have to work on their skills concerning affirmation and acceptance. And one drags down the other. And what's particularly disturbing for me is seeing these statues and this police brutality is that much of it is illegal. But, you know, but there is a popular sentiment, a racism that feels uncomfortable mixing. Actually, in my field, you can see that in The Great Gatsby. Tom Buchanan is reading a book called The Rise of Colored Peoples. And so this is really ingrained in the culture and in the hearts of the people who live in the culture. So how does one get past this feeling that feeds the racism, and a government that understands it has to eliminate racism and, you know, does put policemen on trial when they're caught on camera doing bad things? You know, that's the conflict. They're kind of intertwined, and one feeds on the other.
Yes. And I can't give you a full and complete answer. If I knew how to fix that, we'd be well on our way. What I will say is that, like, I think it's important to fight on both fronts. We absolutely need to change laws and structures. And that also means changing hearts and minds together. Hi, Jim. Thank you for raising your hand nicely.
Good to see you, Drew.
Good to see you too.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the voting record in both the House and the Senate is very interesting, because we, of course, in New York State, tend to see ourselves as, you know, we supported the right thing. And while it was very much drawn on lines of, say, Northeast, of coastal on the West against, if you will, other states, even New York State was not unified, 100% unanimous in support of it.
Right.
And in many ways, for example, I'll bring up the name of Trump. When he's becoming of age politically, this is a contentious issue. And in the minds of many people, it still is an open question. We're willing to say, well, majority rules, and this is what was decided, and we'll all get behind it. And it was never that unanimous. It was it passed by the slimmest of margins. And in many ways, it's almost expected that, for example, people are, you know, their final act is going to be, you know, correcting what they see as a major wrong. This question was never settled in the minds of certain very powerful and wealthy people. But we tend to say, oh, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was incredibly important. It did set the stage for much of what we see now, but it was very contentious at the time.
Yeah, and they had a lot of loopholes into it to get it passed too.
Yeah, and in many ways, by standing back and saying, well, the majority won, it's somehow now unanimously agreed by everyone, really blinds us that this, if you want to call it discussion, that sort of finds a pause in 64 is still going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the voting record on that was eye-opening.
Mhm.
You know, even in states that supported it with a good solid majority, we're still nowhere near unanimous.
Yeah.
I'm almost going over. So if you have some questions, shoot. Oh, the chat's in a different window. 3 questions in the chat. Let me pull that over. Sorry. Oh, Micah posted the thing. What is the most challenging part of this work for you? Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know if you're asking that for me personally.
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
He's in love with you. It's fine.
Dude. Well, you know, it's when people you love disagree with you, and it's when you don't want to speak up, right? It's when you go into an uncomfortable place, and you know, different people are going to get called into different actions, right? And like, I've gotten to stand in between police and protesters when I thought protesters would get hurt, and that's not as terrifying as talking to people in your own friendship circle and your own family, and saying, you know, we need to do something different. That's not. I'm still, you know, like I'm a pretty fortunate person, right? So. My student loan debt was paid for because the United States government decided that my grandfather was white. When he was born in this country, he was Polish, and Polish people weren't white. And then World War II happened, and he served and got the GI Bill, and he was given all kinds of money that other people of color weren't given. And he used it to buy real estate in Connecticut that people of color couldn't buy. And that real estate just got way more valuable, right? So he got free money from the government, and that money grew exponentially. And that paid for my education and all of my 4 siblings' education and all of my, I don't know, 8 other cousins, right? Wow. So like, and now, yeah, now I've got a 401k in the Presbyterian pension plan, right? And I have to think about, like, I've got wealth that other people, you know, like I was born starting on 3rd, right? Like I didn't get $1 million loan from my dad, but I've also had opportunities and blessings that other people had no chance of. And so what's hard for me is thinking, okay, what am I going to do with generational wealth? And am I betraying my ancestors if I don't pass that on to my children or their children? Am I betraying my children if I do that? But like, whose is it, right? Like, it's easy to talk about reparations. Like, well, it's not easy to talk about reparations on a national scale, right? But what do we do with our possibly unjust wealth? That's something that I can't tell you I'm doing the right thing yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, because we're all going to learn and make mistakes and keep growing. So take risks. Maybe that was a risk, telling you guys that I have money in the bank that I'm not sure I should have in my bank.
Well, Drew, I just want to thank you so much for tonight. This has been such a great presentation. If you have any more questions, I'm sure Drew wouldn't mind if you want to give them to us. We'll send them on over, and maybe we can get some more questions. But Showing Up for Racial Justice, I put the website for this exact link in the chat, and it's just Showing Up for Racial Justice. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll pop up too.
And you can find the local Showing Up for Racial Justice chapter on Facebook. If you don't particularly like Showing Up for Racial Justice, but you want to do some racial justice work on a different front, especially if you're good at speaking Spanish, Justice for Migrant Families is another great organization. Coalition for Economic Justice is a faith and labor coalition. You can love them. Voice Buffalo is a coalition of people of faith. I really would encourage you, whatever organization you find, to work with other people, or to make, you know, your congregation those other people that in turn work with other people in a larger movement.
Yeah, we talked about, you know, I think as white people, our first instinct is when we see these issues, oh, let's fix them and let's start our own thing. But we talked about the importance of joining groups that, especially ones that are accountable to people of color, or started by people of color, or organized by people of color, have already putting our weight behind them instead of starting our own thing. And the importance
and
Yeah.
learning from them, because they probably know some stuff from having been in the fight longer.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
All right.
Wow, thank you so much. And as we said, if you're watching this later in the week, if you want to leave questions in the comment section, we will get them to Drew. We will get them to churches. If you want to have a further conversation, this is what it's all about, is educating ourselves and then moving to action in our personal lives, but also in our community, and challenging the systems at play in our world. So thank you so much. The 15 plus on Zoom here, and the 7 or 8 that joined us on Facebook, over 20 in the conversation tonight, and those who will join us later in the week. Thank you all for being here.
Thank
And
you,
I'm
Drew.
so happy I got to see familiar faces again. I miss you all.
Yes.
Yes, so
We
great
miss
to
you.
have
Thanks,
you.
Drew.
All right, yeah, Drew, will you pray us out?
Oh, sure. So, Lord God, I do thank you for this crew, and I thank you for just the spirit that you've put in them to share their lives and their hearts and their minds, and to listen as your spirit inclines their heart towards justice. We do pray that you would use us and use all the people that you are calling to create your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Again,
All right, and we'll
thank
see
you all.
you
See you
next
next
Tuesday.
week.